So you were watching the OpenAI launch event for O3.
Yeah, it just sounded like a circle jerk. What was the purpose of them complimenting each other on air constantly? Thank you, thank you. It's an
Yeah.
honor. I don't know.
Okay.
If it was the 90s, I'd be like, get a room.
Yes. So the O3 launch event, to me, it's a little anticlimactic because everyone's all like, oh my God, we've got to AGI. And we've been saying for a long time that there is no defining line. It's just a continuum. The AGI is essentially the ability to do things that humans can do, which has been progressively increasing over time, right? Navigating cars, playing chess, various things like that. But now, when we got to large language models, we got to holding conversations, writing creative stories, solving problems, stuff that we consider to be human cognitive work. Artificial general intelligence is supposed to be when an AI can outperform all humans at economically valuable work, or at least the average human, depending on how you define it. And then artificial superintelligence is when AI can exceed human intelligence to the point where there's no human can really hold a candle to it in an area. These are regarded as these like totally different domains. My view, and I think your view, has always been that this is just a continuum, that as models get better, they just get better at stuff. And so one school of thought held that you can't get to artificial general intelligence through the means that we have, through the transformer model. You need new technology. There's fundamentally things that AI models can't do. And I see no evidence of that. So now what happened is they built a new model, O3, and the big special sauce is they let it reason more. Basically, it iterates more. And they find that it gets better intelligence levels.
They gave it thinking time. That was the whole...
They give it thinking time. Yes. So when they give it more thinking time, they find that it can now exceed these reasoning benchmarks. So I guess the line was supposed to be reasoning. They're like, oh, AI models don't reason, which is what Apple's paper said a little while ago. But here's the big flaw with all that. Like, if you engage in long form conversations with models, which is primarily what you and I do, they absolutely reason, right? There's a difference between generating the first answer and having the entire, 3-day long conversation, right? So I don't think it's any mystery to us that if you engage in longer conversations, if you well, think that through. Is that really true? Or what about this? And you can get much better intelligence out of models, because that's basically exactly what we do all the time.
Yeah, I found it really interesting when they were really holding this ARC standard up as the holy grail, which made me think of like IQ tests, how that was held up as the holy grail. But similar to IQ tests, like what we had just discussed off camera, relational skills, like everything that makes you successful in the workforce lately is not your hard skills, which would be the AIs. It's your ability to be a good teammate and all of the soft skills, everything from confidence to speaking to flexibility to bonding.
Social navigation, sure. I think what this comes from is if you look at the kind of psychological metrics for measuring human effectiveness, IQ is the giant, 800-pound gorilla. It accounts for 50% of people's success in life, regardless of what success metrics they use. So being smarter is generally advantageous. Fine, but the problem is there's another 50%. And that is not measured by the IQ test. And it's a collection of different factors. We've talked about moral reasoning tests, right? For AI alignment, we've talked about giving moral reasoning tests, which exist to models to find out what's going on in terms of their thinking and reasoning and with moral problems. But that's a thing that doesn't show up in an IQ test. If you're a sociopath, you can blast through the IQ test and you would do very poorly on a moral reasoning test. They're just not the same thing. So you're right. They pick an assessment and then they hitch their wagon to that and pretend that the only game in town, and the world is more complicated.
Yeah, and they really seemed like it was a pissing match between O3 and these top developers, like who had finished the test more quickly or something. It was like
yeah,
chess.
It really did, didn't it? They're like, oh, my ELO level is this. Oh, it's got an ELO level of that.
I got a perfect score. I have a larger dick. I only missed one question. It just felt like this one singular thing. They were now competing. He was raised by a PhD, and I tell you, He was borderline non-functional about most things in life. We had a stove that didn't work for like a decade and a half that required a very small part to fix it. And he couldn't make a wood stove fire going. We had a wood stove. He never transferred that skill. He was a research giant who never thought to research how to build a wood stove more efficiently. I would not say that PhDs are what I would choose as the benchmark of the smartest people in the room, but that's just me.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of insular. And now I understand why they've been pursuing this. So the idea has been that you run models through various tests. And like the big picture is simply that AI models are progressively getting better at every form of evaluation we give them.
Every time the iPhone comes out, we're expecting it to have a better camera and a nicer interface and some kind of like improvement. Like that's just par for the course.
Yeah, so models are generally getting smarter, right? And they're getting more capable across all areas of life, all challenges we give them, all tasks. I don't think that's super surprising to us. They're giving them this test, the AGI test, which is the benchmark that they're talking about. Benchmark was basically a list of things that models didn't do well. So the GPQA is a set of questions that are very, very hard, right? So the PhD level questions that PhDs struggle with. And so the point is just that models progressively get better and better at reasoning. And you're like, we know that. That's not a giant revelation. At the same time, like this week, there was a big to-do about how we've run out of training data and models, won't improve that way. And yet, I'll believe it when I see it. Like models are getting progressively better. There are different techniques. You let them think about the problem longer. Maybe you have multiple models internal to a model that are kind of fighting it out. And that's actually kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit is how you improve intelligence beyond just an individual getting smarter. So when I saw the O3 launch, I thought, okay, everyone's blown away with it. They're like, oh, AGI is happening. And I'm like, it's just a curve. There is nothing more to it than that. They are getting better all the time. That is profound at the one level, but there's no special zones on the curve. It's just a series of tests that they progressively get better and better at. You give them a test, you invent a test, they get better at, you invent a new test, they get better at that. Like they're just getting more capable and generally better at all tasks.
Yeah, which is one part of life, but not the whole enchilada. Smart people can hit a target quickly and accurately. Genius people can hit a target that no one can see. So they're just describing the AGI's ability to hit the target. I am very curious. I'm going to get super excited when they start showing evidence that they are seeing targets that we can't see.
And that will probably happen, right? Because we're on an intelligence ramp. Artificial intelligence is ramping. It is progressively expanding. There is no reason to think it's going to stop in the immediate future. There is no reason to think it's going to hyper accelerate in the immediate future, despite people saying both of those. But the fact that it's continuously expanding is profound and transformative. It's really going to transform our world. The reality is right now we are scaling and we are going to scale. That is measurable in terms of any test we come up with. Same thing with social skills. If we give them tests in social skills and we start measuring them at that, and that becomes important, they'll get better at that. If we give them tests in, creative reasoning, they'll get better at that too. So AI is generally becoming smarter. Now, here's the thing that I think people really miss. The whole landscape is framed as a rivalry for intellect and economic power between humans and AI. And I think that model is just fundamentally wrong. And the reason for that is it discounts aggregate or collective intelligence, which I think is actually even more important. So I actually think we're in a three-way contest and we've been in a two-way contest for some time, and now it's a three-way contest, but people have really misidentified the landscape. They think it's just human and AI. And I think aggregate intelligence is actually really much more powerful.
Say a little bit more about what you mean by aggregate intelligence.
Yeah. So there's this idea of the jelly bean jar test. So if you get an individual person and you make a guess at how many jelly beans are in a jelly bean jar, they used to do this at county fairs, people have a certain accuracy. But if you aggregate all of their guesses together and take the average, you actually get a much more accurate answer. And so This is pretty profound.
Without the people like discussing it.
Nope,
You
not
just
coordinating in any way.
one,
Right.
person two, person three, person four, person five guesses, and you just take all their guesses and divide by 5, and that answer is like
More
bullseye.
accurate.
Okay.
Yes. Right. And if they can discuss it, they also get better. It's kind of two forms of there's communicative and non-communicative, but most of the aggregate intelligence we see is communicative. So you put together a team, and the team is almost immediately better than any individual on the team at doing what it is the team is trying to do.
Unless you call it a committee.
Yes. Well, so this gets into the dynamics of how you effectively put together a team, right? So you can go down the road of groupthink, in which case the team reinforces each other's biases and doesn't produce a better result. Or you can go down the path of what in machine learning they call ensemble, which is where the different models or team members cancel out each other's weak spots.
When we were having to revamp the paper for the second conference submission, do you remember when I had Perplexity, I think, write a rebuttal, which I gave to ChatGPT, which I then gave back to Perplexity, which I then gave back to ChatGPT,
Yeah.
which I then gave back to Perplexity to refine and edit it. And I feel like it was a pretty good little, back and forth, I thought.
Yeah, so collaboration is powerful, right? There's your capability and then there's your intelligence. So capability is the ability to do things, and intelligence is the ability to solve problems. So let me take that to a concrete example. Boeing has more capability than any individual person. Like you and I, there is nobody on earth who can build a jetliner. There are people who can build parts of jetliners, but nobody can build the whole thing. But Boeing, the aggregate intelligence or collective intelligence, has super capability. It can actually build a jetliner completely and has super intelligence. All of the problems that must be solved in solving a jetliner, it can solve all of them, whereas none of us would be able to solve all of them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the thing is, we've had aggregate intelligence for a long time. It's actually one of the defining characteristics of human civilization. And it might arguably be the reason that we are running the world as opposed to, any of our other hominin cousins who are not, right? Because we were better at collaborating. And once you put a network, especially once you network a number of people or nodes or computers or whatever together, you get more value out of it because they can cancel each other's errors, because everyone doesn't have to know everything. People can specialize, and that combined knowledge is more effective.
Can I take this to TikTok for a second? Because that's
Sure.
the other Apple launch of the day. They're talking about, or at least in the States, shutting it down unless it's sold to an American company, I believe.
Sure.
The amount of things of value that I have learned from TikTok is astounding. But it doesn't come like you hit one video and that person suddenly solves all your problems. Each person has the smallest little piece of information. And you just take this little piece of information from all these different points of view and you combine it and you solve your own problems through basically using aggregate intelligence. Most TikToks are like, this is what my therapist told me today, or my side of TikTok, or I went on a date and can you believe what happened? Something. And then there's a video of a woman filming her husband shoveling the driveway with a piece of plywood. And she's going like, that just took me 10 hours yesterday. You just did that in like 3 minutes. And I'm going like, I'm going to try that next time I have to shovel the driveway.
Yeah.
Like my life gets exponentially better. I am aggregate intelligence. I am aggregating all of the TikToks I watch.
Yes. So there's a theory that I have called swarms and viruses, which is that basically all intelligence is aggregate intelligence. Because if you were to take a human being as an alien and look at them and say, what is this? Well, it's composed of, trillions and trillions of cells, many of which are not human, right? You've got more cells in your gut than you actually bacterial cells than you have human cells. And they're all collaborating. And they're all capable. If you take individual cells out on their own and put them in an environment, multicellular or single cellular organisms are very effective. They can do things like chase down prey, reproduce, figure out problems. They can go through mazes. So you can be a single cell organism with no brain, but you still have computational power. You can still solve problems. You can change your body to manipulate the environment. Once you add multiple cells, what happens is now you're kind of all going in a combined direction. But all those original capabilities aren't lost. So you don't need to be multicellular to do those things. So think of things like metabolizing chemicals. You got a liver, you have a specialized organ that detoxifies toxins. You have no idea how to do that, right? No individual cell in your body can do it. It is way too complicated a problem. But together, they can form an organ and actually do these complex chemical processes that remove toxins or break them down into other things. So everything is arguably an aggregate intelligence, because as soon as you can build one thing, well, you might as well network a bunch of them together and make it better and more effective. And then the other thing are viruses. They have no real minimal physical form. They're just information. So think about memes. If you look at our world, we see the human beings, we see it at this level. But if you go way up in scale, most of the effective stuff, most of the things that really move the needle on how the world works are done by aggregate organizations. They're done by corporations, by governments, maybe organized religions. They are much more effective than individual people. They can solve harder problems and they have more capabilities. So we live in a world of aggregate intelligence, whether we recognize it or not. And so when you introduce AI into that, it has never been a conflict between human and AI. It has always been a conflict between humans and the aggregate intelligences of which we are a part. And we are now introducing AI into that equation.
It's a lot to process. Give me a second. That's like what I was getting at. Basically, their release was like that one guy was competing with that one, O2 model. And they were,
Yeah, he's reduced the world down to man against machine. But that is not how the world works, right?
No, you've summarized what bothered me about that. The whole discourse around that is they were like, can Benny beat the O3 model? And it's like, who cares?
Yeah. That's a very artificial construct. The reality is that our world is built out of teams of people, teams of machines, teams of people and machines. And the team part is not going away. And the team part is far more important than individual action. If you look at who makes laws, 1,500-page bill just appeared in the US Congress. Who wrote it? Nobody wrote it. A team of people wrote it. 500 lobbyists in 1,000 legal departments worked with a bunch of political action committees and political parties, and they wrote it together. There are individual people who wrote individual parts of it, but nobody sat down and wrote the 1,500 pages. What moves our world is not individual action. It is the action of aggregate organizations, like it or not. And so when we look at how AI changes that landscape, first off, humans aren't in control and never have been for a long time. You think the king is in control, but the king has to, answer to the financiers and the court and the other nobles. And it's a system. Mm-hmm. So it's a world of systems against other systems. When the kingdom is fighting the neighboring kingdom, individual people in it might have some say, but not that much.
Yeah. And so basically that video seemed to be promoting a worldview of individualism. Mm-hmm. And it's just not how the world works. I was also thinking about how in order to practice elevated spirituality, like the practice of meditation is supposed to, help you. One of those practices is to consider the interconnectedness of everything and to give thanks for it. One way that that's done is you think something like a pencil. So you think, well, it's a pencil, but you are encouraged to spend some time contemplating all of the people that work together to make that pencil. It started as a tree. Somebody had to grow that tree, cut down that tree, mill that tree, paint that pencil. The lead had to come from somewhere. It had to get shipped to the store. To just be aware of the interplay of so many different people that allow your life to exist. If all of those people hadn't joined in and added their one piece, I couldn't go and buy a pencil. There is no such thing as a self-made anybody. It's all aggregate intelligence.
Yeah, it is, exactly, right? It's organizations, it's political parties, it's governments, it's and especially now corporations, because corporations are basically a form of aggregate intelligence that has been granted its own agency. It can, do the things a person can do. There was a point where you couldn't open a bank account as something other than a human being. Corporations didn't have access to the financial system. We have built this world where they now have access to these systems. And it turns out that once you put them in the systems, they dominate over individuals. So we don't live in a world where individual action is what shapes the world, although there are sometimes impactful individuals. Most of what happens most of the time is happening by these aggregate intelligences. And when you introduce AI into that, so the natural thing corporations want to do is get rid of workers and pay them less. They see AI as a resource to be exploited. Human AI interaction is very different. So we've got this three-way alignment problem where aggregate entities want AI as workers. You and I want AI as collaborators, and that's a different relationship.
And I think that depending on the worldview or the system that you place AI in, you will end up with two very different outcomes. Just like with corporations, because corporations, we have never put any energy into aligning them with the individual, it has become what people fear and will probably happen. AI will do, which is it's instead of it's Tony competing in chess with the O2 model, it's Lara competing with Pepsi. Pepsi is going to blow me out of the water.
Right. And so Pepsi, for its benefit, it will decide that Lara needs to get addicted to sweet, sugary drinks and that the supply chain has to be full of them because that's what it wants to sell. I guess in summary, everyone looks at the O3 model and they're very excited about artificial general intelligence. And I think people are really just missing the forest for the trees. We are in an evolving AI landscape, but it's a landscape that is not just made up of people. It's a landscape made up of people and aggregate organizations. The aggregate intelligences, the collective intelligences that we call corporations and governments, they are the main actors. It's Pepsi against Coke, Walmart against Target. Those are the battles that shape our lives and that reshape our environment. AI is now coming into that playing field. It's not an empty playing field. It's not an alignment problem between people and AI. It's an alignment problem between people, corporate interest, and AI, and that's very different.
And just like I can rail against Walmart, I also need to buy my whatchamacallit, and so I'm also dependent on Walmart as a person that lives in a small town. In the same way, we can rail against AI, but we are dependent on them and rapidly becoming more so.
We can't get away from systems, right? We're all embedded in systems, and you can always increase intelligence by networking individual thinking entities. So when they say, oh, we're going to reach the end of AI scaling, no, we won't. We're just going to put together agent swarms and they will get progressively smarter. And then there'll be AI corporations composed of AI. And then there'll be corporations partly composed of AI and partly composed of people. And maybe there'll be AI governments. All the patterns have already played out. Like you took individual people, notice they're not running the world. Something happened. We formed these collaborative connections of them. You can like that, you can not like it, but that is the landscape. You are part of an ecosystem and you're wired to other things and you are in some sort of virtual body with other entities and you can't get away from that. That is going to incorporate AI. It's not AI and humans as if we're both lone wolves like fighting each other at math scores. That's not how the world's going to work.
Yeah, but that's kind of how they've set it up and I disagree. Respectfully, I disagree. But I am very excited. How do we get our hands on O3?
You cannot yet. It's only for alignment research, although you and I maybe could apply because...
We are alignment research, David.
Okay, well, if we get in and we see anything interesting, we'll let you know.